Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the second album from Pretty Lights, Filling Up the City Skies. Both volumes. You know, when I came back to Taking Up Your Precious Time, I wasn't exactly preparing myself for a lot of surprises. I still kinda sorta had it in rotation and put it on every now and then, even if it wasn't top-notch stuff all the way through. Pretty Lights basically had that and a color map of the sun, which I'll be getting to, that I return to on a fairly regular basis. But all the stuff in between was the stuff I left by the wayside. Like, this album was where Pretty Lights went from being Derek Vincent Smith and Michael Menard to just Derek Vincent Smith all by himself, showcasing the talents that Derek held on his own. And, I don't think the project is really fully ever recovered from the loss of Menard. Derek is certainly a very talented guy on his own. However, this album is not as good as Taking Up Your Precious Time, and I still think Menard would go on to take his career far beyond where Pretty Lights went by himself. Now, honestly, I didn't have a lot of high expectations going back into this one for the first time in ages. But when I listened to it for the first time again, so many good memories came back. I really remembered why I liked this guy so much in the first place, and I really got pumped up to get back into his other stuff again, and do this discography review. That's not to say I don't have my problems with it. It was just a lot better than I remembered it being. Now here's the thing about this album, it's obviously a double album, and to be honest, I'm not really sure it needed to be. I couldn't really pinpoint specific tracks to you that say, oh, you really need to cut this one. But not all of them are necessarily for me. I guess one nice thing about this album is that I have very different opinions on the two discs. Enough so that I probably could review them separately, but I thought about it and felt like their strengths and weaknesses balance each other out pretty well, and I like them roughly the same amount. Just for very different reasons. Disc 1 focused more on Pretty Lights' sampling skills and stayed on the down-tempo side of things explored on the previous album, maybe a bit more upbeat than there. While Disc 2 revealed all sorts of way more intense stuff from the guy that would probably go down better in a live setting, and went on to more characterize the stuff he ended up doing later on. I'll start with Disc 1. That felt like a progression from Taking Up Your Precious Time. Now, I always remembered this album to me be much more of the summer feel-good variety, and while it is significantly less depressing than the debut, it's not all summer good feel stuff all the time. I'll tell you what track really stuck out to me on here that never really stuck out to me back in my high school days, and that's Solamente. It's got a bit more groove and momentum than the typical vibes from the debut, but it probably could have fit alongside those old ones. Like, it really had some moody and cinematic flavors to it. There were some really interesting sounds in this one that I'd never noticed before. That track always blended in with the crowd for me back in the day, but right now, it's a huge favorite. I suppose it doesn't help that it's followed by a track that sounds almost exactly the same, but isn't as good, that track being Fill Your Eyes. But still, did not give enough credit to Solamente. Oh yeah, and on the topic of songs growing on me, I also did find that I like the track The Time Has Come quite a bit more than I used to. See, I've always had somewhat of a distaste for the sound of the organ, just like the instrument just in general. But I like the sunny vibes on this one, and it's more fun to listen to than I thought it would be. The organ doesn't really bother me here anymore. I don't know if I'd call it a favorite, but it is a grower. Meanwhile, though, there were a couple of tracks on here that weren't as good as I remembered. One criticism I thought I could give to Pretty Lights a few years ago was that he could make some really fantastic hooks, but he didn't have a lot to offer beneath the surface. And I don't think that totally applies to everything he's done, but it is a problem that I notice occasionally on some songs. Like, I absolutely love the hooks on the tracks Cold Feeling and Summer's Gone, especially the section on the former that goes, "The time for us is now! The time for us is now! The time for us is now!" That section's still awesome. But when I re-listened to these tracks, I did notice they were a lot more simplistic than I remembered, and I almost considered removing them from my favorites. Oh, I kept them on, because those hooks are still solid. There was one track on here, though, that was a major disappointment after coming back to it, though, and that was My Other Love. This song, again, isn't bad at all, but I used to really like this one, and now it's just kinda okay. I suppose one thing that I noticed, there were more than a few tracks on here that kinda reprised some of the unpleasant themes from the debut. And I noticed these were often my least favorites as a high schooler. Tracks like Something's Wrong and Pop Quiz were two major examples, really uncomfortable stuff there. And the former kind of stretches on a bit longer than it needed to. Evening Sun and Make You Feel too, although they're more sad than they are unpleasant. And My Other Love, I suppose, kind of falls into that bin. A track that I didn't realize was depressing back in the day. And also into the I Remember This Being More Interesting bin as well. It probably went on a minute or so longer than it needed to. I don't know, I used to love this one, not sure what happened there. But not everything felt like it was Pretty Lights reprising old themes and coming up short. There were, like, some actual summer feel-good vibes tracks on here, too, that, like, actually had feel-good vibes on it. The opener, Change Is Gonna Come, still a ton of fun, and holds up excellently. As to the cheery and catchy Last I Am Free, and the somewhat mysterious but also nostalgic Double Love, all fantastic tracks. But the one track on disc 1 that's held up the best by far, that I loved in high school and love just as much now, is the final track on this half, Maybe Tomorrow. This track is just so unambiguously happy and cheery, it's almost kind of like something the Avalanches would do. In fact, there is one sample on here that Pretty Lights utilized here that the Avalanches utilized on their own song, 2 Hearts and 3/4 Time. I think I prefer their version, but pitching down an obviously female voice down to sound male. I mean, I think it actually ended up sounding like some kind of Motown track, like The Temptations or something. And really doesn't feel wrong. It works. So yeah, to be honest though, the quality gap between the standouts and the skippable tracks on the first half of this album really isn't that wide. I may not love tracks like Something's Wrong or My Other Love, but there are still perfectly serviceable tracks, and I don't feel compelled to skip any of them. But now we get to the second disc on this album, which is a completely different beast entirely. Now on the other hand, the good stuff on disc 2, I think, is even better than the best from disc 1. Like, by a pretty substantial amount at that. But on the other hand, the not as good stuff from disc 2 is also much worse than the bad stuff from disc 1. There are songs on disc 2 I'm absolutely freaking in love with, and there are some that are completely unlistenable to me. And it all comes down to Pretty Light's synth work. I always used to think this was the one quality of his that really needed work, but it's not so much subpar as it is inconsistent. The guy is capable of some really fun and engaging synth noodling, even at this point in his career. But when he falls flat, oh man, does he fall flat. A good example is the first track on disc 2, How We Do. This track is a decent intro and is at least short, and the guy's synthesizer work is interesting, I guess, but it's not fun to listen to. It's all dark and droning and loud without really being energetic. And this is even worse on the track Who Loves Me, which is a particularly tedious one to get through. The sample he uses as the hook is annoying as hell, and again, his dubstep breakdowns are like dirges. They don't get me pumped up at all. But you compare that to a track like More Important Than Michael Jordan, which is almost entirely focused around the guy's synth work with some occasional samples thrown in for flavor, and it is one of the best tracks the guy has ever done. Heck, it's probably my highlight from the whole album. He just keeps piling hook after hook next to each other, and keeps a steady backbeat of synth that just keeps you on the edge of your seat for like 8.5 minutes, and it is awesome. Oh, and he pulls off that showcase of hooks over synth beat trick twice on this album. And the other track he does this is Hot Like Sauce. And unlike a More Important Than Michael Jordan, which is laid out more like a typical moody, up-tempo electronic track with some vague cinematic vibes, this one's outlined more like some kind of hip-hop posse cut, where a bunch of rapper acapellas spit out hook after hook, and all of which hit like right on the mark and are easily memorable. Designed specifically to make you say, oh shit, every few measures, in the same way you would with a series of really great rap verses. Just accomplished purely through the way the song sounds. Both of these tracks are spot on, extending out over a long time and making really good use of their length. Unfortunately, not everything on here makes use of that length as well. The track Take Your Son Away is That is basically 10 minutes of synth noodling with the hook thrown in here and there. And seriously did not need to be 10 minutes long. It got really tedious after a while, even though it wasn't nearly as unpleasant as Who Loves Me. Also, the kid singing hook really doesn't help. I think it's just a pet peeve of mine, maybe, to hear a chorus of little kids singing at me. Looking at you, by the way, Jean-Michel Jarre. I don't think the guy's synth work alone is enough to get me into a song. The song B-Rock is another example. It's not bad, it sounds fine, but it's just kind of forgettable. And the album also ends with a remix of Finally Moving, which is not even close to as good as the original. Like, I've heard a live version of this song that kind of mashes it up with the original, and that was pretty awesome, but anytime I listen to this by itself, I think, come on, dude, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's really dubstep-centric, which fits the tone of this half of the album, and makes sense as an ending, but sounds better on paper than it does in practice. Not really a great one. But all the remaining songs on disc 2 are solid. If I Gave You My Love is some nice upbeat fun. Aimin at Your Head has an amazing sample hook that slams you in the face. Up and Down I Go rambles on a bit like Take the Sun Away, but focuses on a way, way, way better hook, and doesn't overstay its welcome. And Electro Cali is so energetic and up-tempo at this point, it's like Liam Howlett from The Prodigy popped in for a second to amp things up. I almost kind of wish the album ended there, but oh well. So, overall. Well, okay, it's kind of tough to talk about Filling Up the City Skies as one big holistic experience. It's incredibly inconsistent. The two halves are really like two different albums. Basically, it's a collection of 25 tracks in which Derek Vincent Smith proves his capabilities and diversity as a producer, but Pretty Lights is still a dang good producer. I may not exactly be taken by every track on here, but I'm sure even the ones I don't like have their fans. But I'm glad I sat down and really digested what I thought of everything, and enjoyed the experience quite a bit. And I'd say I can give it my recommendation. I'm feeling a 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.